Okay, thank you, Brian. If you get a chance, thank the guys in the booth. That's a pretty stressful job at times, trying to get everything worked out. So thank you, Brian. Before we get started this morning, I've asked Greg if he would to lead us in a prayer before we start the class.
Bless us with. Father, we thank you for allowing us to meet here this morning publicly and freely to worship you. Father, we ask that you would be with us now as we open your word. We study the book of Ruth. We know that the Old Testament was written for our learning. Pray that we will learn from it and apply it to our lives. In Jesus' name, amen.
Let me say, hope you enjoy the day. If you're having family over today, and everybody be safe. I hope you have a wonderful day. Of course, we celebrate the death of Christ every Lord's Day, as you well know. But this is an opportunity many times for families to get together, and we certainly hope you enjoy your time together. I wanted to share a book that I've been using to help me with the book of Ruth. It's called The Bethlehem Road. If you want to get more information and a little bit more in-depth study about the book of Ruth, this was written by a man by the name of Michael Whitworth. He's a member of the church. He's actually been here before to speak. He went through a really tough trial. He lost a child, a little girl. I believe she was about 3 or 4 years old. And he really had a rough go. He lost his dad a little before that. So he leaned on the book of Ruth as the providence of God. And so I'd suggest that if you want to get a more in-depth study, Bethlehem Road by Michael Whitworth. We were not here last week, so let's do a quick review, and it'll be pretty quick for those of you that might be visiting. If you are visiting, we're certainly glad that you're here. Raise your hand if you have a comment you'd like to make. We're not going to cover every slide. What I do want to do is, did you start at put that slide at the very beginning, Brian?
No, but I will move back there if you want.
No, that's okay. Well, we might, that's what I need you to do.
That's the beginning. That's the one.
No, it's going to be the cast. That's it right there. Thank you. This is just for just a memory of all of us that are here. First of all, we have a family. They are living in what city? When we start the book of Ruth, where are they? Hopefully we all know that. Correct. They are in Bethlehem. What's going on in Bethlehem right now? Tremendous famine. So what is Elimelech? He's the father and head of the house. His wife is named Naomi. They have 2 sons. Elimelech and sons of Elimelech and Naomi are Mahlon. He was the wife of Orpah, and then Chilon, which was the wife of Ruth. Where did they leave from? Where did they go once they left from Bethlehem because of the famine? One more time. Moab. Moab was a friendly place for Christians, correct? For people that were following God, absolutely not. They worship pagan gods. So they're putting themselves in a position where they're not going to be surrounded with very good people, unfortunately. Ruth comes into the picture as the Moabite who stayed with Naomi after her both husbands died, and then Boaz would be the future husband of Ruth. And we've covered all those characters already so far. Again, we began in Bethlehem in Israelite territory. They moved their family because of the dearth and because of famine. Nothing there to keep them there except, of course, their faith, staying in that area. And then they would return back to Bethlehem, Judah, after God stopped the famine. And he now knew that, or she knew that she would be able to come back and hopefully be able to take care of herself and her her daughter-in-law. It's not a very far journey from Bethlehem to Moab. It was a 7 to 10 day trip. That's the route most likely that would be taken. There are only 3 options for Naomi to be able to survive. This is after her husband died. What was her husband's name? Elimelech. We know that he died while they were in Moab. We also know that her 2 sons died, so she was left with no one. About the only thing she could do is return to her parents' home, and a widow would return for safety of her parents' home. Naomi encouraged her daughter-in-laws to do so. They were at this point still in Moab, so she tried her best to get her daughter-in-laws to stay there. The second option would be to remarry. Now, marriage during that time was a source of stability and security for women in the ancient Near East. We think Naomi was around 50 years old at that time, so she could be probably past childbearing years, not necessarily, but possibly so. That would deter her ability to find someone that would marry her, because a woman's main value at that time was to bear children. Barrenness was considered reasonable grounds for divorce even at that time. Then the third was she could go back and support herself by working. That was most likely not a very good option at that time in history. Ruth makes some promises to Naomi. She says, if you will allow me to go back with you, because I want to go with you. I love you as my mother-in-law. I want to take care of you as your daughter-in-law. And so here's the promises that Ruth made to Naomi. First of all, she said, your people are going to be my people. It was very difficult to pull off at that time because immigrant women were looked down upon at that time, very much so. To change cultures at this time would have been hard. She also said, your God is my God. That would be hard because the gods that she all knew were pagan gods. Obviously, Naomi had a very positive impact on this young lady's life in that she now believes that Naomi's God is the true and living God. Then she says, where you die, I will die. Where you are buried, I will be buried. Now this, again, we mentioned this. This seems like maybe a small thing to Westerners, but it would be very much a lot of emotional stress to be buried away from someone's family. It was very significant in ancient times, and it was understood that you'd be buried with your family in your family plot. So for her to say, I'm going to go back with you, and I'll also, wherever you die, I'll die. But when she said, I'll be buried where you are buried, that even goes afterlife, the commitment that she makes. She even says God can deal with her negatively if she does not keep this promise to Naomi. She makes that commitment not only to Naomi, but also to God. We're not going to cover these. I don't think we'll have time to do that. We will finish up with our review by talking a little bit about chapter 2, since we covered that last week, or the last time we got together. Our generosity should extend to those outside our circle of social standing. What do I mean by that? What does that got to do with this lesson? Treat others the way we want to be treated, regardless of skin color, regardless of where they're from, their religion at this particular time. We should treat all people as God would want us to treat them. Boaz exemplified his good traits in his everyday life and in his daily workplace. We find that from chapter 2. Boaz in no way took credit for his goodness to Ruth. Rather, he pointed to her goodness toward Naomi as to why she deserved to receive good treatment. That is our summary. We're going to go ahead and start in chapter 3. Did I miss anybody or miss anything that we need to talk about as we move forward? If not, Greg, let's read chapter 3 of Ruth, verses 1 through 5.
Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, My daughter, should I not seek rest for you, that it may be well with you? Is not Boaz our relative, with whose young women you were? See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshold floor. Wash, therefore, and anoint yourself, and put on your cloak and go down to the threshing floor. But do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. But when he lies down, observe the place where he lies, then go uncover his feet and lie down. And he will tell you what to do. As she replied, All that you say I will do.
Let's talk about what in the world the suggestion that Naomi is making to her daughter-in-law is. First of all, historians say, and we can't put a lot of bond on this, but they say at this point Ruth has been in Boaz's field for probably about 2 months. And he has witnessed her, and he knows enough about her to know that she's a good person. Obviously, she must be a very attractive young lady. We'll talk about that while we think that in a few minutes. But first of all, read verse 1 again, Greg, please.
Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, should I not seek rest for you, that it may be well with you?"
Rest in this context actually is the same word as used as marriage. So what she's saying here in verse 1 is, I would like to see if I can help you find a man to marry. Go back and let's go to chapter 1, Greg. Read verses 8 and 9.
But Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go, return, each of you, to her mother's house. May the Lord be kindly with you, as you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant that you may find rest, each of you in the house of her husband." Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept.
See in verse 9, the word rest is used again. So actually what she did is she prayed to God that Naomi prayed to God that for her husband, for Ruth, and for her other daughter-in-law. Naomi knew that if she died suddenly, Ruth, who was a Moabite, would be left in a very precarious position as a widow in a foreign land. So for her to leave her would have been tough on Ruth as well. We read so much about the love of Ruth, don't we? I've always, and rightly so. But that love is reciprocated equally. Naomi loved Ruth. Not only is this a love story of Ruth loving her mother-in-law and sacrificing and going back with her, but we're going to read through the next couple of chapters how much Naomi cared for her in a very selfless way. And we're going to see that really it's a fact that Naomi loved Ruth as well as much as Ruth did love Naomi. She just wanted what was the best for her. From Isaiah chapter 41, we learned that the harvest season usually ended with a celebration, and Naomi knew that. Therefore, it was time, hopefully, for her to be able to try to get her daughter-in-law, Ruth, in a position so that Boaz would pay more attention to her even than what he had done so far. How risky was this plan that Naomi put together for Ruth? Now, ladies, put yourself, I know it's a different culture. There's no way we can comprehend and understand these things. But if you could do so, can you imagine the risk? If you're Naomi, you're sending a daughter-in-law that you love like a daughter to lay at the feet of a man. You have no idea, you know he's a good man, but you have no idea what his reaction will be. Or just assume that now, ladies, that you are Ruth, and you've been asked to do this by your mother-in-law. How much apprehension you would have, how much fear you would have. I would say it would be pretty immense. Even though Naomi knew the character of Boaz, Ruth was exposing herself to possible humiliation, or even worse, what if he did not take and accept the possibility of a marriage? It was commonly known that during this time, the men would stay in the area to protect their harvest, and prostitutes visited the areas to tempt the men that were there. I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, unfortunately, that many times a lot of these women that had no spouses and no family, that's the way they made their living, was to be able to prostitute themselves, which obviously is an awful thing that these women were forced to do. But that was the concern. She prepared by putting on her best, and it says that she anointed herself. What does that mean?
Dolled herself up.
She dolled herself up, but it looks like the way I read it, it's putting on perfume. She normally scented oils from imported plants were used for the perfumes, and that's the way it was translated. Read verse 4, Greg.
But when he lies down, observe the place where he lies. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do.
Okay, now, ladies, you're back to being Ruth, and this men are Boaz, and the suggestion is made by Naomi. He's going to be covered up. It's probably a little chilly, and I want you to uncover his feet. I want you to snuggle at the end of his feet. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry, Jim. Sir.
I was going to say, if you'll watch this study, why Naomi tells Ruth to do this, and throughout this lesson where we wind up that she marries Boaz, this is the custom that the Jewish custom there in those things. Maybe not necessarily biblical that we see, but that was the custom. And that's the reason that Naomi told Ruth what to do. This was what she was supposed to do. And they had, just like the law where if you're a husband dies.
You're getting way ahead of me, Jim.
All right, I won't.
Yeah, I know where you're going with it. I appreciate it. Well, we might not even get to that today. Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to say something about how much that she loved her daughters-in-law and how much they loved her. If you haven't had any daughters and you only had sons, I can relate to that because most women want a daughter. And when you get two boys and they're boys, you know, they're not like raising a daughter. My mother had four daughters and two sons. But anyway, go back to that. I can understand how she felt about them and how they must have felt about her. If you have a daughter-in-law and not had any sons, no daughters-in-law and only had sons, you will love those girls to death. Because I got two of them and I know how that is. And there's nobody that loves her better than I do.
I think every lady in here could probably say that about their daughter-in-law.
Yes,
Good point.
and I think it's a mutual relationship between us. And I know I get on her nerves, and she doesn't get on my nerves, but I get on her nerves, I'm sure, because I'm a big talker, and she.
I'm not going to comment on that.
But you know, with having a daughter-in-law that doesn't speak English very well and doesn't understand a whole lot you say, we have a good rapport. And I think we do get along and understand each other, even at that. But I can see that so much with Ruth and Naomi here. And I think it's just a real good love story for women who have daughters-in-law. Because, you know, if you love them, and you know, I know you've heard this. I've heard people I've worked with, I can't stand my mother-in-law. I wish she wasn't around. Well, let me tell you, they didn't have the mother-in-law that I had, because I absolutely loved her. She was good to me. And I don't know why women would say that to about their mothers-in-law. I don't understand that. But maybe a lot of it too is because Christian women are that way.
Right.
So, you know, but anyway, I thought that was, you know, when I was reading this, I thought about that. I can relate to her.
Right. Okay. Read verse 4 again, Gray. We got a little off track, so read verse 4. Let's go back to that.
But when he lies down, observe the place where he lies. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do.
Okay. There's some confusion about what is meant by uncovering his feet. In our society, of course, this would appear to be very suggestive that a woman would do that. But as Jim pointed out, at that time, the customs of the people of Israel did not view it in that light. Lying at his feet simply symbolized Ruth's desire to marry Boaz. In a sense, it was almost like instead of him proposing to her, she's basically proposing to him and letting him know that she is interested in him becoming her husband. But let's put the but in there. An unmarried man and woman were lying together in the middle of the night, so it was still considered to be very risky. What I mentioned earlier was going on during that time when men were there to protect the crops. What other women were coming in? We talked about that. Women of ill repute, women that were there for a different reason. So you still had to, it was still considered a little risky in the ancient world to speak of a woman uncovering any part of a man's body at night was considered highly suggestive. The Hebrew word for uncover was often itself a euphemism for sexual activity. However, we know that in this case, this text in Ruth does not suggest that in any way, form, or fashion. Make sure I point that out. Now let's focus on Naomi again for just a minute. Where is she when this is taking place? Where is she? Is she there with Ruth? Where is she? She's at home. Go back to what Nancy's talking about. Do you think she slept that night? You think she worried about it? Because who made this suggestion? Naomi. You think maybe there was a little bit of nerves going through her body right now? Wondering and hoping that God's providence would take care of everything. She probably didn't sleep a wink, wondering now how Boaz might react also to the way she was coming in. I would imagine it's highly likely that she worried herself sick, and she probably questioned herself, as human nature would be, whether she was doing the right thing or not. She loved Ruth and would in no way want to put her in any type of jeopardy. Anything else through verses 1 through 5? Anybody? Yes, Jeff.
You mentioned how her actions could be misconstrued for something else. And the scripture doesn't say, and I don't really know I don't know if they're living in a tent somewhere or, I don't know how they're living. But I wondered if some of the men that were in his employ, are they standing watch outside or, just to protect or at least sound an alarm if something happens and all that. And then to see Ruth go in, the people outside, if there were, may have looked at Ruth and said, oh, okay, I know what you're going in there for, that kind of thing. So that, what you're talking about, her reputation and all that it's a very, like you said, real sensitive situation that she's in. And I'm just making the assumption. I was just assuming not everybody's asleep. I'm sure somebody's up on watch, maybe keep a fire going or something, whatever. But anyway, I just thought for Ruth to slip in like that, if there were men, around and let her in, that kind of thing, then there's that assumption of why she's going in there like that. So, so it was very risky what she was doing.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. Back to Nancy. Phil.
She also had to have trust in Naomi, because Naomi told her, go in and lie down, and he will tell you what to do. So she, if somebody said that to me, I'm not going in there to tell me what to do. And then she went in there, and when did you read verse 5 yet?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I didn't want to get ahead of you.
That's okay.
When she laid down there, he will tell you what you should do. And then verse 5 said, and he said unto her, all that thou sayest unto me, I will do.
She said.
She said, yeah. Did I say it wrong? Well, she said that to him.
Mm-hmm.
And
No, Naomi's speaking to Ruth, and she's telling Ruth read verse 5 again, Greg, would you?
And she replied, all that you say I will do.
oh, I see, I was reading it
Yeah.
wrong. Okay.
That's Naomi speaking to Ruth,
Okay.
right? Yeah. Okay.
But anyway, she did say, I'll do whatever he says to do. So, they didn't know what was going to happen there. I mean, that was beforehand.
Okay.
So anyway, I had it wrong.
No,
so
it's okay. It's
I
okay.
apologize.
No problem. Verses 6 through 13, Greg.
So she went down to the threshing floor and did just as her mother-in-law had commanded her. And when Boaz had eaten and drunk, and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. And she came softly and uncovered his feet and lay down. At midnight the man was startled and turned over, and behold, a woman lay at his feet. He said, who are you? And she answered, I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer. And he said, may you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than the first, in that you have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich. And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you ask, for all my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman. And now it is true that I am a redeemer. Yet there is a redeemer nearer than I. Remain tonight, and in the morning, if he will redeem you, good, let him do it. But if he is not willing to redeem you, then as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. Lie down until the morning.
A lot of information here. We may go back and reread some of these verses. One thing that Jeff had mentioned earlier, we read that it says that she came softly. That's the same type of phrase that's used actually when David approached Saul. And of course, no one saw David approach Saul, because if they had seen him, they would have tried to murder him. So from that, we can maybe assume that even if someone was out there watching the field, that she was undetected when it says that she came softly. And verse 8, men, if we're asleep and all of a sudden we feel somebody at our feet, what's going to be our reaction? Come on, guys. What's your reaction? Anybody? I'm going to be stubborn. Somebody tell me something. A woman comes and you're laying sound asleep and they lay at your feet. What's going to be your reaction?
Get up.
Get up? What emotion would be there? Fear. Yeah, I think so. I think fear definitely would be a part of it. Read verse 8, if you would, Greg.
At midnight the man was startled and turned over, and behold, a woman lay at his feet.
Verse 8, one more time.
At midnight the man was startled and turned over, and behold, a woman lay at his feet.
Okay, the King James Version uses the word afraid. His uses startled. Similar type of reaction, I think, is what we're looking at. Also, it says in verse 9, spread therefore thy skirt. And he said, who art thou? And she answered, I'm Ruth. And he says, spread therefore thy skirt over thine handmaid, for thou art a near kinsman. When she says this, what does she mean by that? It's more of again, from what I read from custom, it's more of a continuation of the proposal from Ruth to Boaz, emphasizing again, I'm here laying at your feet, now spread your skirt. It was similar to having a husband give refuge under his wings to his family if they're in danger. Same type of analogy. Read verse 10 again, Greg, please.
And he said, may you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than the first, and that you have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich.
What does this mean? He's telling her, in essence, I know you have more options, but you're not choosing some young guy that looks great and has great riches. That's what he's saying to her. I know that you have more options and you're going to be blessed. Most likely she'd have more options for marriage, which again indicates to us that even when he first saw her in the field, he noticed her, so she must be a very beautiful woman. She could have married for love or money, but instead she thought of the security of her family and chose to try to wed someone that could take care of her family. Boaz recognizes the attractiveness of Ruth, not only from the outside, but from her heart, of course. Boaz acknowledged her love for her family in that she is designed to marry someone who would take care of not only her, but her entire family. Also, tradition seems to suggest that Boaz, again, this is tradition, Boaz would have been maybe around 80 years old when he married Ruth. This is not a biblical information. It's something I got from some commentaries that we cannot totally rely on. But it gives us a sense as to why maybe he felt that way. You know, you have better options. Now, we do know that they bore a child, but we also know other Old Testament characters older than that did bear children. So again, I hate to use assumptions, but that's what the tradition says, and it kind of goes hand in hand with why she said, you've got better options than me, an old man. Okay? Yes, Greg?
So that word there that's translated covering, it actually is translated wing in chapter 2, verse 12.
Could you read that, Greg?
May the Lord reward your work and your wages be full from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to seek refuge.
Okay. Very good. Very good. Thank you, Greg. Let's read 12 and 13 one more time, Greg, please. It's a little bit about what Jim was going to talk about earlier about the kinsman, I think.
And now it is true that I am a redeemer, yet there is a redeemer nearer than I. Remain tonight and in the morning. If he will redeem you, good, let him do it. But if he is not willing to redeem you, then as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. Lie down until the morning.
It's interesting, back in Deuteronomy chapter 25, it really says nothing about a near kinsman. It's normally the brother of the deceased husband who has the responsibility to marry the widow and bear children for his dead brother. So it's a little odd that this is being brought out as far as a near kinsman. The kinsman at this point, of course, denotes the near relative who is responsible for the economic well-being of a relative, and he comes into play when the relative is in distress and cannot take care of the family because of death, etc. It's designed to maintain the wholeness and health of the family relationships even after the person has died. That was the tradition in Deuteronomy. Again, not nearest of kin. Don't know if this was just a custom in that area. Obviously, the elders at the gate agreed to it. We'll talk about that in a second. So obviously, it was something that was adhered to. But in Boaz's honesty, what did he say he had to do first? Yeah, I need to first check with the nearest kinsman. I'm not the nearest kinsman. I'm the second nearest, but I really, in all fairness, need to check with him. Yes. Yeah, Jim.
You brought it out there. I was just going to say that the New American Standard refers, instead of Redeemer,
What verse are we talking about, Jim?
New American,
No, what verse?
the one about Redeemer, the word Redeemer through there is translated close relative. And like you already brought out, if there's a closer relative, he has the responsibility first. But Boaz would be second in that line of responsibility.
Right, okay. Anybody else over here? If anybody in the balcony wants to raise their hand, just yell, and we'll get a mic up there. Yes, Jeff.
I've kind of forgotten now, but isn't it Naomi that's related to Boaz? Naomi's husband, right? And so we're sending Ruth in, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I guess where I'm going with that is, if Boaz is saying, well, I need to check with the next of kin, Boaz would be the next of kin for Naomi,
Naomi, yeah.
not Ruth.
Yeah, we're gonna cover that.
Oh, all right. So what I was, okay, so then where I was going with that is maybe Ruth was saying, hey, I'm just speculating, but the right thing to do, Boaz, would be you or the other person would take care of me because we're the kin. However, I'm going to send to you Ruth. That kind of thing. Maybe it was more along that line, but I was just.
Yeah, there's some confusion in my mind on that, and I'll get all the help that you guys can give me when we get to that point, but anything else, Jeff?
No, that's.
Okay, continuing talking about through verse 13. What does he instruct her to do, which again is a sign of love that he has for her and safety on her behalf? Stay there. It's too dangerous to go right now. But he does send her back, it appears, in the early morning. It could be, though, if she's seen leaving his area, that it might bring about unmerited shame on her, and he didn't want that to be the case. He didn't want to do anything to hurt her reputation. Anything else through verse 13? I appreciate the comments. Yes, Jeff.
Sorry, Bean, you brought that
No,
back
that's
up.
okay.
I was going to say, maybe, I don't want to say maybe because the scripture bears out, Boaz was not that kind of man either, right? He could have taken advantage of that situation, but at least he seems to be not that kind of man.
Right.
When he sees her in the field and all of what we've talked about so far up to this point here, he doesn't seem to be the kind of man that would have taken advantage of her either.
Right. He actually sees in her more than just her beauty, doesn't he? He mentions, I know about you, and here's why I know about you, because I know you take care of your mother-in-law so well. Okay. Wynn's got a comment.
One thing to think about too is, they're out in the field somewhere and, most likely, Ruth and Naomi are actually in the city of Bethlehem. So, if you're talking about the middle of the night, usually, city gates are closed at this time. So, to send her back would, definitely draw, attention of anyone on watch. And, she might not be able to get back home until morning anyway.
Right, okay. Anybody else? Verses 14, oh, hold on just a second, got Nancy. Okay.
By the time they got back to Bethlehem, Ruth and Naomi, from that time until this time about her telling him to go and lay at Boaz's feet, that had to have been a long, drawn-out time, don't you think? I mean, it wasn't like, yet last week you're there, and now then you're working in his field for a few days, and now then you're laying at his feet, and now then he's talking about marriage.
Yeah, it was a short period of time. I think, as I said, historians say that she'd probably been in the field for about 2 months at that point. So.
Wow, they must have got married in a hurry. So,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, it's hard for me to understand that.
Yeah,
You know, most time you go with somebody 2 or 3 years before you ever talk about getting married.
yeah. But remember the reason for the marriage was not for anything at this point other than she wanting to take care of Naomi, and Naomi, in hindsight, really wanting to take care of Ruth.
Yeah.
So, okay. Verses 14 through 18, Greg, we'll try to finish the chapter up before we end the class.
So she lay at his feet until the morning, but arose before one could recognize another. And he said, "Let it be known that the woman came to the threshing floor." And he said, "Bring the garment you are wearing and hold it out." So she held it, and he measured out 6 measures of barley and put it on her. Then she went into the city, and when she came to her mother-in-law, she said, "How did you fare, my daughter?" And she told her all that the man had done for her, saying, "These 6 measures of barley he gave to me, for he said to me, 'You must not go back empty-handed to your mother-in-law.'" She replied, "Wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out, for the man will not rest, but will settle the matter today."
Obviously, we know that nothing improper had taken place. The Bible is clear to point that out. So he just didn't want any accusations. He wants to protect her well-being and her reputation. What I wanted to find out too, I looked up what is talking about a mantle. I assumed a mantle might be something like that you carry, but a mantle actually is a large, loosely fitting garment, normally made of animal skin, and in that area it probably was made of sheepskin. So it could have held quite a bit of weight without tearing. And this amount would be around 75 pounds. So most likely what she did is she wrapped it around her shoulders, and because it says that it was put it on her. So this is what happened is, why did he give her all this food? Again, some speculation. This food could be, in a sense, kind of a down payment to show Naomi that he was pleased with Ruth and he would like to have her hand in marriage. The gift was not used to buy Ruth, any such thing, but it was a gift and it was used as a promise. The giving of food was not uncommon and not unheard of during ancient times to be able to try to from her parents. Again, hold on just a second. Nobody can hear you. Just a second, Nancy.
You know, the King James used that mantle, they said veil, the King James does. That's what women wore around their head and around their neck. And I guess that was to keep the dust from getting their hair dirty or something. I don't know that, but that could be said as that veil
Hold the
thing.
mic up a little.
That could be a veil like you would wear, that mantle that your version said. Could be that same thing too, is what they wore around their heads.
I suppose it could, but they said mantles were normally made of sheepskin. I wouldn't think that sheepskin would be worn around the head, but it might be. I looked that up. That's what it said. Yeah.
Cloak.
Sir?
Cloak.
Cloak, yes, sir. Yeah, that's another description I had, was a cloak, right. When we talked about this, we'll wrap the class up here in just a second. We can finish a little early. I'd imagine that Naomi had a very sleepless night, worrying if her plan was successful or not, or if she'd even endangered her or might cause her reputation to be marred. So what did she do when Ruth got back there? What'd she do? What would be typical if you were Naomi and your daughter-in-law has gotten instructions what to do. What would you ladies do when your daughter-in-law walked in? What would you do? Come on. How'd he go? How'd he go? Did he accept? Did he accept the proposal? Sure, I'm sure she was full of questions. And what did she do? It's kind of very interesting also. Naomi was very wise. Her wisdom became crystal clear when she basically says what? Sit still. Just wait. Let things happen. You don't do anything else. You've done what you need to do. Just wait. Naomi knew that Boaz would not rest until the matter was settled, because she knew that he desired to have her as a wife as much as she desired to have him as a husband. Naomi was really risking her future, if you think about it, by trying hard to set Ruth up with Boaz, because what would have prevented her from just leaving Naomi totally out of her life, and she could be possibly just taken out of the picture. The next study we'll have in chapter 4, we're going to finish a little early because I hate to go into chapter 4. We're going to talk about what the process Boaz used to move forward. And thank you for your comments. I appreciate it very much, and hope you all have a great day. Thank you.